Hi, I'm Michael Smith. Welcome to our Drupal meetup for November. And this is Jennifer Lampton. And here we go.
Right.
switch over to the camera and let everybody know where they can, if they want to watch the slides, what the URL is.
Okay.
The way I can do that is actually...
I posted it in the first comment on the Hangout in the meetup.com.
Oh, so you can find it on meetup.com. And that would be, oops, that's still working good. I will okay, so right now,
Can I seal the USB too?
oh, that's weird. Go ahead. Okay, so
Hooray!
I've still got, yes. So if you go to the Meetup website, and okay, so the first comment from Jen Lampton will give you the URL. I've still got, yes. So if you go to the Meetup website, and okay, so the first comment, we can't set it up, from Jen Lampton, will give you the URL. Sorry about that.
Is it playing? Is there like a video playing?
So if you go to, we have this echo. Go to the Meetup website, and okay, so the first comment, we can't set it up, from Jen Lampton, will give you the URL. I know, it's we have a ghost in the machine here. I'm sorry. So if you go to this echo, where's that coming from? Website. Okay, so the first comment, can't set it up from Jen Lampton. Give you the URL. I know, it's we have a ghost in the machine here. I'm sorry.
Hey.
Sorry. Okay, so you're on live.
All right.
My apologies. For those who want to see the slides, by the way, everything will be posted online. You can watch the video recording on YouTube.
All right, so this is Backdrop. When you install it out of the box, it finally looks different from Drupal. The first version looked exactly like Drupal. We eventually added some things, like we changed the background color from blue to black, and we're like, hey, it doesn't look like Drupal anymore. This last version, Backdrop 1.5, includes a new front-end theme that actually makes it look significantly different from Drupal, which is pretty exciting. We've got different fonts, different colors. There are a couple of things that you would expect. We're including admin menu out of the box. So this is one of the things where Drupal 7 came with its toolbar, but still more than 50% of sites that installed it uninstalled the normal toolbar and added a different module, like admin module or admin instead. So we said, rather than fixing the toolbar that nobody likes, let's just put in the solution that's proven itself in contrib. But as with anything that, as it gets added into core, I'm just turning on responsive design mode here so you can see we made this menu responsive and touch friendly. So now as we run out of room, you can see it collapses nicely, which is great. The admin menu also contains a search box, so if you're looking for the modules page, which we renamed to functionality in Backdrop, it'll show you specifically where it is. It'll open the part of the drop-down menu that contains the link you're looking for and hopefully train users how to find what it is that they're after. We also, in the latest version, included a drop-down menu out of the box, which is something that I think people found very non-intuitive with Drupal, is if you create a nested menu link structure, you don't actually see any of the nested links because the default menu is only one level deep. So this is just a setting, so anyone who's installed an old version will still have the old Drupal whatever, but if you install a new version of Backdrop, the menus now come with this setting. It also includes all of the settings from menu block module, so you can choose your starting level and how much depth and all of that stuff too. This is also another responsive, touch-friendly JavaScript library. The admin menu one is specific to Drupal because it does a bunch of crazy stuff with adding weird things in different places. But this public one is just a proven contrib JavaScript library that was the best one we found. It also works with, it's really accessible, so if you need to use keyboard navigation, that works too. I'm not sure how to do that from here, but oh yeah, you might have also noticed that our main menu is mobile friendly. So on mobile, it'll just automatically work if you put in a menu and then you want your site to work on a phone. So all of Backdrop is responsive out of the box. Kind of the one benefit of building one of the major benefits of building a site on Backdrop instead of on Drupal 7 today is the fact that you don't have to overcome all of the responsive problems that didn't exist 5 years ago when Drupal 7 came out. So let me turn off. Okay. So things you would expect. If I go to add content, it has the same two default content types that Drupal has. We renamed them. We took the same names that worked for WordPress. We think that post makes more sense to people than article. And we changed basic page to just page. If you go to create a post, this is kind of what you would see in Drupal. It's got a rich text editor, which is fantastic. You can insert images if you want to. Let's see what I have here. Do I have bunnies? I do. Okay, bunnies are always work safe. Okay, so it allows you to put in alternate text. You can add a caption if you want to add a caption, and when you insert the image, it lets you type in a caption. You can resize the images. You can, I should have typed some text in here, but you can align it right or left. All of the things that you would expect to be able to do with images that was really hard to get to work in Drupal is kind of baked in out of the box, which is great. We've also made a couple of the contrib modules that were in Drupal in core and enabled by default in Backdrop. So we have path auto automatically turned on for all content out of the box, so you don't get any /node URLs on your site. These are configured in a way that we made kind of a best guess assumption. If you don't like how it is, you can change it. We also fixed the bulk updating tools that were in path auto in Drupal 7 that made it really hard to change things. So now hopefully they're easier to change if we get the assumptions wrong. We also add redirect module, so if you change your node, it'll automatically redirect from, when you change the node title, the path is automatically generated from the title, so the path will change. And that means that anyone who had linked to the old content anywhere on the web would have had a broken link, but now what happens is you get a redirect generated automatically too, so the old link will redirect people to the new one. So no 404s, hopefully that'll be great. One of the things that's a little bit different is when you go to create new types of content on a Backdrop site, we made the process, we're trying to focus on what these tools are like for site builders, because that's what Drupal we felt was really best at, is enabling people to kind of click together 80% of your site or 70% of your site or some massive amount just by configuring it. So we wanted to make that easier on people in Backdrop. So I'm going to create something called a project. You'll notice a lot of the same things you see in Drupal, but we added some new ones. The ability to decide whether you want that sticky or promoted checkbox to appear on the node form, so you can clean up the display of that node form for your editors. Permissions. So when you create a new content type, you don't, oops, I forgot to set up the permissions. Now I have to go to the permissions page and set up the permissions. Same thing for URL aliases. Oops, I forgot to set up an alias pattern. I have to go to that page. All of these settings still exist in the places that you would expect to find them coming from Drupal 7, but we also moved them here so that when you're creating a new piece of content, you don't have to do that back and forth activity of making sure you got all of your pieces connected. So that's kind of creating a new content type. Let's see, what else is new and exciting? Two things that I love, layouts. This is a new top-level concept in Backdrop. If any of you have used panels in Drupal, this is a port of the panels module. We just threw out the user interface and wrote a new one. But underneath the hood, the APIs are very similar to panels. The only difference is that they're object-oriented instead of plugin based. But for the most part, all of the parts that you used in panels are still there in Backdrop. So out of the box, you get a front-end layout, which will work for every page on your site, except for the home page. A back-end layout, which will work on every administrative page on your site. And then the home page overrides only the home page of your site. So if I were to delete this home page layout, the default layout would take over. So default is sort of the fallback. If there's not a more specific layout defined, then it will use that. So what panels does is it allows you to arrange blocks in different regions on the page. In Drupal 7, it assumed that every page on your site would be using the same general template, and that didn't end up really reflecting what people are doing with modern websites today. Every page tends to be a little different, and sometimes they have patterns that emerge, like, oh, my blog posts will use one template, but my homepage is different, I have landing pages that are different. So this is a tool that allows you to create any number of different templates you want. Right out of the box, we ship with 10 layouts that we assume people might need to use. We tried to make them as flexible as possible. You can, of course, create your own if you want custom layouts, and this is another top-level item like a modular theme. You can drop in a set of layouts that are specific to your site. On the layouts page, we'll just edit the default one. This is drag and drop. It's not like the Blocks UI, which was a table, and you had to figure out where your things were. So if you want to put something into a different place on the page, you can just drag it and drop it into place, which I think makes a little more sense to people. This interface also allows you to add any block anywhere else in the system, or you can create new custom blocks. So I'm going to add just a custom block that'll be some sample text, and save. And then if we go to any page on my site, for example, my first post, you should see sample text at the top. We took a couple of tools, views. So views, you guys know views module, #1 used module in all of Drupal. We just put that in core exactly as it was. We did a little cleanup on the UI to make sure that it was responsive and work on your tablet, but for the most part, it's exactly the same thing. There is a much bigger issue that's like, maybe we should make the views UI better, but that was really hard. So we're like, we'll just make an issue for that, and we'll come back to it later. We wanted to also, people who already knew how to use views in Drupal 7 to know how to use views in Backdrop, decreasing the learning curve, especially for transition. And in the future, when Backdrop kind of has its own user base, not necessarily pulling from people moving from Drupal, we'll have more power to change things in ways that are more intuitive for the people that we have. So let's see.
Do you have a block page similar to Drupal, or everything gets done in the layouts?
So we have a list of blocks. I think it's just called custom blocks. So if you just wanted to see what blocks you had, that would be where you would go to find them. But if you want to position things, that happens on each layout individually. So layouts. One of the things that I really like about the layouts UI that was really confusing for people in the panels UI is this concept of context. So if I want to create a layout for all of my posts, for example, let's do a 50-50 layout, why not? Oh, I typed that in the wrong field. Posts. It'll automatically detect that this path that I typed in, /% already exists in the system, and it'll add the context for me automatically. So unlike panels where you had to assign specific values to things and you really had to understand how the system normally worked to recreate it in panels or page manager, Backdrop includes that out of the box. So if you type in a path that exists, it goes, oh, I got it, that's a node path. Same thing with user. If you typed in user/%, it would say, oh, I recognize that percent thing is representing something that I will load as a user. Same thing for taxonomy term. Anything that already has a context, it'll auto-detect, which is great. And then when you have a context available, the conditions that you apply, so like if I were just to create this, it would fire on every page at path node / whatever. But if I wanted it to only work on posts, I'm going to add a condition that'll say only do it where node type is post. And because it knows that the node context is available, provides conditions to me that are based on the fact that there's a node. So I can filter this by node type and say only show me this layout on pages of type post. And then now, if I create this layout, I can add custom block. Oh, let me show you this too. So something that people really loved about views was the ability to get exact control over the markup that was coming out of it. So overriding the divs and the classes and the heading tags. That was something that when it first went into views, I'm like, everyone's going to hate this. No one's going to like this tool. People who want to write markup want to be in templates. I was so wrong. Everybody loved that feature. And so after we put views into Backdrop, we're like, well, let's do that same thing that everybody loves about views and do it in blocks. So if you want to use your block.tpl.php file, you leave this as default and you can override the template file. Or you can change it here to dynamic. And if you change it to dynamic, you can decide whether the div has a wrapper tag, and if so, what tag it is. You can add specific classes to the wrapper. You can change the heading tag. You can change heading classes, content tag. Say I don't want any content tag in there. You can have complete control over the markup that this block will output. So that's something that's pretty fun. All right, dragging stuff around, save layout. So now this layout should affect only my post content types. So if I go to a piece of content that is a post, it should be split 50-50. So my test block is on the left and my content is on the right. So layouts is an entirely new UI in panels. Underneath the code, if you've written code for panels, it's very comparable to Backdrop. Just put it into an object. Every little bit has its own function, and you're done. Let's see. So the last killer feature that I absolutely love about Backdrop is the configuration management tool. So this is something that Drupal 8 includes the configuration management tool. If we were going to create a competing project with Drupal 8, we had to include it. In Drupal 7, the solution to this problem is using this module called features, which is supposed to bundle together like individual pieces of content and let you version and distribute them widely. Turns out it's much better at doing configuration management because it overrides all of that stuff and lets you bundle your configurations together and deploy them from one environment to another. It is the best tool we have. It is a huge time sink from a developer perspective. I just want to make one change to one thing and deploy it. Then takes more time managing your features than it did making the change that you needed to make. So this is something that is very important for Backdrop in terms of decreasing the cost of maintenance. So what we did is we used a very early version of the configuration management system that went into Drupal 8 before it ended up in the shape that it's in today. So this is saving all of its configuration into JSON files that live on the disk. They write to file, they read from file. There's no caching layer in between unless it's something really complicated like a view that needs to maintain its own cache. But the files themselves, there's no config cache. So if I wanted to take a look at what these config files look like, let's take a look at that layout we created. So that was my posts layout. It's really straightforward. And this is, again, JSON is something that any developer or person who has experience working with web stuff should understand. So it's a low barrier to entry thing. It also is 75 times faster than working in YAML, which is what Drupal 8 chose. So those things lend to two of our philosophy principles. So even though we have the same exact solution as Drupal 8, we did it in a very different way because our principles are different than Drupal 8's. So this just contains, here's all of the positions of the blocks in your layout, and then, hey, here's the block called, or the region called content, and here's this block called system header, and here's all of the settings for that block. So in a pinch, if your site was down for some reason, you didn't have a UI to edit, you could go and edit this file, and that would make the change. Same thing is true for deployment. You can deploy a single file from one site to another using this UI. You can deploy an entire tarball of, like, I built this entire Drupal site or Backdrop site. That happens a lot. And I've got all the config files, and I'm just going to put them over here on this other site, and then it'll fire up and it'll work, which is really great. There are a couple of things we don't manage in config, like if you want to delete something, we don't automatically delete it for you when it gets imported. The site will throw an error and say, whoa, 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 if you want to delete that thing, you really need to be sure you're going to delete it, so you have to go do it yourself, and you need to do it manually. So you have to go to the content type and delete the field, whatever it is you want it to do. And that's more of, it was really hard to make it happen automatically and kind of scarily dangerous. So we just said, don't do it automatically. We'll just leave that cruft out of our code and present the user with the "are you sure" activity they have to do in order to be sure to do that. Prevent them shooting themselves in the foot. But more importantly, one of the things that I really love about working with Backdrop is that all of these config files can be stored and managed in code as well. So I like to commit my config directory into version control, and I'll make whatever changes I need in configuration. I'll commit them, and then I just do a git pull on the site I'm working on, or git push on the site I'm working on, and git pull on the site where I'm deploying to. And it'll copy all of the configuration files from the active directory where I was working into a temporary staging location on the site I'm working on, and then it'll run through a synchronization script where it'll pull in all of those changes and make any database changes in the background that need to go with the configurations that have been modified. So it's, I think, the biggest time saver of working in Backdrop is getting to play with config. Really fun. There's a whole ton of other little teeny tiny changes that I feel like aren't nearly as exciting. Is there anything in particular you're curious about in terms of what's the same as Drupal, what's different, or anything you want to know more about?
Can you talk about the theme layer or the appearance? I mean, how different or how similar it is?
Sure. So the biggest difference between the theme system in Drupal 7 and in Backdrop is the fact that we have layouts. Because the theme in Drupal 7 used to be responsible for where the blocks were on the page in all of those regions. Maybe I can pull up some code really fast. Sure. Here we go. So in Backdrop, themes, Bartik. We included the Bartik theme from Drupal 7 specifically for upgrade purposes, so you can switch to your theme in Drupal 7 and you can upgrade and it'll upgrade into Bartik. There's also a layout that goes with the Bartik theme called Simmons that will handle all of the mapping of all of your location of blocks on Drupal 7 to your location of blocks in layouts in Backdrop. So if you look at the info file for Bartik in Backdrop, it doesn't contain any region information. All it is the style sheets that are needed. There's a couple of settings, but that's it. You can also look at the layout called Simmons, and it has an info file, and it just contains all of the regions that used to be in your theme. So the biggest difference is splitting those two things apart. What used to be your page.tpl.php file in Drupal 7 is now your layouts template file. So in here, there's a layout template file. It's layout -- and then whatever the name of your layout is. So in this case, it's layout -- Simmons. It contains all of the logic around whether your sidebars show or don't show based on what content is on the page, the same way that it did in Drupal 7.
So this is what I would override if in case we want to change something.
It depends what you want to change. Most...
we have to pre-process our functions and all of the themes.
Yeah, so in Drupal 7, there were a lot of things that you did change in pre-process page. The things that I usually changed were compensating for the fact that I didn't have something like layouts. So in Backdrop, I find that I pre-process that template a lot less because I have a different layout where I can just use the one that I want. There are preprocessors for layout functions. There's still preprocessors for page, although that just wraps your HTML and body tag like the HTML template file did in Drupal 7. But yeah, I mean, it would really depend on exactly what you needed to have changed. I find that I use the smaller preprocessors more in Backdrop than the big giant page one. But it's there if you need it, layouts. And each layout has its own PHP file as well. So here's what would have happened in the preprocess page for Drupal 7 is now in the layout preprocess function for Backdrop. But it's much smaller. This just adds classes, it looks like. that's kind of what I do usually. Let's see. Other things that are different in Drupal 8, we removed the process layer. Not even sure you knew there was a process layer. It's something that's really hard for new theme developers to grok, that you have a template file and you have a pre-process layer, and if what you want to change isn't in your pre-process layer, it might have showed up in the process layer, which is in between those two things. That was really confusing for people. We removed it in Drupal 8. We also removed it in Backdrop. In Drupal 8, we removed it by putting those processing elements into the Twig language, so you have filters and stuff that do the same thing. In Backdrop, we aren't using Twig, it's still using PHP, so we just put function calls into templates. That was something that was really taboo in Drupal 7. In Backdrop, we're like, why is it taboo? Let's just say it's fine. And so now if you look inside, let's see, a template file for Backdrop, you see like print implode in order to get your classes out, or print backdrop attributes in order to flatten an array into a string of attributes. So we're just calling those functions directly from the template file, which I think is easier for new people to see because we're not hiding the magic from them. We're just printing it out. And hopefully it will be more intuitive for people who already know PHP, just feel like they can get in there and do what they need to do. So yeah, no process layer and layouts are the only thing that's really different about the theme system. The fact that we don't have render as much. We tried to render as many things early enough that we could, and then things that we couldn't render early, we still have in here in render. We tried to make it a little less crazy, but not so much change that people wouldn't recognize it. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are people coming into Backdrop? Are they existing, almost all existing Drupal 7 customers, or are they coming in from the outside of all? Or what's the motivation?
So right now, our primary target are people coming from Drupal 7 because Backdrop is so similar to Drupal 7. That's who I am. That's who most of my clients are. They have Drupal 7 or Drupal 6 even. I find that the overlap between the Drupal 6 audience and the Backdrop audience is much more guaranteed to be compatible than Drupal 7. Drupal 7 has been used to do so many amazing, wonderful things. Some of them are kind of outside of the scope of what we're interested in making Backdrop core do really well. It's something that's contrib land, and if you want to write those custom modules, you can. And people are coming to us with those big projects because they feel like it's less work to upgrade all their custom modules from Drupal 7 to Backdrop than it is from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. But sometimes that's just like, okay, that's great that you're here, but we're for the other guys. Whereas Drupal 6, there are a lot of people on Drupal 6 whose philosophies and needs are kind of more in line with Backdrop's. Long term, we do realize that Backdrop cannot survive on Drupal 7 expats alone, right? Like there's a huge world out there, and what we're working on today actually is doing a WordPress import tool. So people who have worked on WordPress for a long time and perhaps have gotten to the edge of what WordPress is really good at doing and they're starting to feel some of the constraints will have an easy out as well. So right now, Backdrop has a built-in upgrade path from Drupal 7. In the future, it'll have an upgrade path from WordPress. I'm not sure that'll be built into core or not. It'll depend on usage statistics on how many people are actually coming from WordPress or not. But there will be a contrib project that'll tape the export that your WordPress site generates and import it with the same content types and fields and everything that you had set up before. So our...
What would their motivation be primarily if they're coming from, well, in both cases, both from Drupal 7 and WordPress, what are they typically looking for that they don't have now, or they're just afraid that Drupal 7 is going to disappear, or what?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. Like, what is the motivation to move off of Drupal 7 today? Honestly, there's not a lot of motivation to move off of Drupal 7 today. Most of the sites that I'm working on are either sites that are coming from 6 or new sites, right? Because Drupal 7 is already proven it's successful, and people who have Drupal 7 sites have already overcome the hardest problems in making their Drupal 7 site do the things it needs to do. So people I'm getting that are coming from Drupal 7 are usually like, oh, I need to invest a bunch of money in X thing, and it's going to require a bunch of custom code, and I don't want to write it today and throw it out a year from now. So what platform can I write it on today where I know it'll still be valid a year from now? So those people usually are, I'm about to undertake something new. Where do I do it? So because I know Drupal 7 is 5 years old, 6 years old now. And they're worried about what's going to happen when Drupal 7 is end of life. I do tell people you probably have a good long time before Drupal 7 is end of life. I wouldn't rush into anything if you're not confident about it. But yeah, sometimes people are just like, I don't want to be writing something I know I have no way out of. So yeah, that's the motivation for Drupal 7. It's usually I have something new to write and I don't want the code to be wasted. For WordPress, it's going to be very different, and it'll depend on what site you're coming from. I've got one example of a site right now where I built one of my clients a site on Backdrop, and he loved it. And then he had a friend who wanted a website, typical story, and he was like, well, I think you should do it on Backdrop, but that site didn't have any budget. And he was like, well, let's do it on WordPress instead, because I think I can throw a theme on it and get you out the door. But he had a bunch of complicated relationships between different types of content. And the way WordPress's loop works is that it can't query the database in a way that is efficient to build you something like Drupal has a view, where it can show you all of the content with a specific filter set. Like, oh, show me all of my pants in size medium that are blue, right? Like trying to do those interrelated filters, it's really bad at. And so we bought like a $300 plugin, and he was like, I can get it to do it, but it takes 15 seconds to load the page. So that's just not what WordPress was meant for. It's not, interrelated contextual data. It's meant for blogging, and it's really good at blogging. And when someone tries to take it and kind of morph it into something that it can do but it isn't good at, they're going to hit some limitations. That's an example of one. Performance, in that case it was because of a query, but sometimes have performance issues because of page views. Sometimes people have performance issues because they have some bad code on there that, they don't know what it is that's causing the problem. Sometimes people have issues with access for various levels of administrators. So there are a bunch of plugins that for WordPress that allow you to have multiple levels of user access. But again, because that wasn't what WordPress was meant to do from the beginning, sometimes you can get some serious performance issues coming from that as well. So I want to have one level of user who creates all of the content, and one level of user who reviews the content, and one level of user who adds art to the content, and then another user who approves it. That kind of workflow is really hard to do in WordPress because it wasn't built to do that from the beginning, where something like Drupal or Backdrop can do that from the start. So we're hoping that we let WordPress do what it's good at, its blogging stuff. Backdrop is one step up, where it's like you need those things that the software needs to be architected differently from the ground up to do them well or to do them efficiently. There are people who are frustrated with WordPress that are looking for a way out. We're hoping to get them. In order to get them, we have a lot more work to do on user experience. WordPress has an excellent user experience, but I think we're getting there. And I think that if we can focus on getting our site building suite stronger, these WordPress people won't need to know anything about how the code works. They'll just be able to click together the view or build the layout in the way that makes sense to them to lower the learning curve. And if we can migrate in their data and give them here's your site on Backdrop, just build the view, and all they have to do is figure out the view, they're going to be thrilled. So that's kind of why we're moving that way. I don't know a lot of people in the WordPress world in terms of my clients are primarily Drupal people. But talking to people who have both, there seems to be very little loyalty to a particular software platform. Like people love WordPress, people love Drupal, but people who do both are like, whatever, I'll try one. If it doesn't work, I'll try the other one. Whereas when I go to like Drupal meetups and Drupal camps, people are so like, I would never do anything other than Drupal. I'm like, okay, it's all just code, guys. So I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. We're starting to kind of branch out a little bit and talk to people at kind of, open source conferences or just developer conferences and see what else is out there and what people are working on and see what people are passionate about. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of hit the, this is for users, slightly higher needs than what WordPress can do gap that's opening up there where Drupal's stepping out.
So in terms of scaling up, do we have a benchmark for where we recommend Backdrop, and then if it goes beyond that, maybe just tell them go ahead, maybe Drupal is the best solution for you.
Yeah.
How do you recommend?
So I don't have a step-by-step guide. That would be something that would be really useful. For me, I look at it on a kind of a per project basis in terms of what is your site actually doing, and right now, how much of it is already done by Backdrop, right? So it's like, what modules are you using that you need that aren't ready yet, and what does their future look like in Backdrop? So if it's something that's like, we just haven't ported field group yet, but it'll be there in a month, no problem. Like you can alpha test the module and give us feedback and we'll get it out. But if it's something like I have a really complex Drupal commerce site, well, we're not going to have a Drupal commerce for Backdrop. The people who love Drupal commerce are going to love Drupal 8. Ryan Surama, the author of Drupal commerce, is working on another tool for Backdrop called Backshop that is more in line with Backdrop's philosophy, where it's going to be a one module drop-in that contains the most common, like authorized.net and PayPal, and that's it, and it's going to be built in. And it's going to, and I think you'll see that a lot when you look at these really big Drupal projects that have evolved and say, well, if you want all of the bells and whistles and all of the options, you're going to want the Drupal, because Drupal's going to come with all the bells and whistles and all the options. If you, however, just need to get the job done and you don't need any of the bells and whistles and the options, there's going to be a solution for you in Backdrop.
Do we have a straight migration path from 6 to Backdrop or 7 to Backdrop?
So there is a built-in path from 7 to Backdrop. If you take your Drupal 7 database and you point your Backdrop site at it, it'll churn through all of the updates that are needed, and you get a Backdrop site in the end. It takes 30 seconds maybe to do that, because honestly nothing much has changed. So there's a couple of little things that's got to kind of clean up, and then it's like, ta-da, all of your views are now in config, and that's the kind of all it does. But there's no built-in upgrade path like that from Drupal 6. I'm working on a contrib Drupal 7 project where I've just kind of thrown in all of the modules that are in Backdrop core into Drupal 7 distribution that contains the Drupal 7 upgrade path. I think right now I'm recommending that people do that. So you go from 6 to 7, but you use the 7 that's kind of a Backdrop version of 7, and then you go from 7 to Backdrop. But I've heard people wanting to take all of the stuff that's in Backdrop and put that in there as well, so that you have a version of Backdrop that contains all of the update hooks from 6. I am not entirely sure that will work, because there are some assumptions, particularly around the field system, where Drupal 7 did not handle that upgrade path, right? It had to go through CCK module. And I'm not sure it'll be hard to get that going smoothly. So right now it's the same way you would upgrade from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 or Drupal 6 to Drupal 8. You go, well, 6 to 8, I don't know, you'd migrate. You can migrate to Backdrop too. We have a copy of Migrate module if you want to go that way. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing upgrades from 6 to 7 and then 7 to Backdrop. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thanks for listening, and thanks for the great questions, and thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jen, and thank everyone online. I also like to thank FFW for hosting the food and drink.
Nice.
And GoDaddy, of course, for providing these great facilities. So once again, if there's no other questions, then we're wrapping it up. So thank you all very much.